All right, guys, so now we're going to start to look at the context API. We're also going to look at a couple new hooks, which are use context and use reducer. And the idea here is to give you an alternative to Redux. If you've ever used Redux before, I'm not going to say, that Redux is bad, because I think that it's needed for very large applications, but the context API gives you a really nice solution for small to medium-sized applications when you want to manage app-level state. And there's a lot of different ways to implement it. In fact, in the React community right now, it seems that there's a lot of confusion on exactly how to implement it. But I've come up with a pretty nice folder and file structure that I think is scalable. I think it works. I think it's clean. You're free to disagree, but I'm going to go about this in the best way that I think possible, using the context API along with these other hooks. And I think it will make our application much cleaner. So let's get started. Basically, what I want to do first, let's close this stuff up, is in our source folder, I'm going to create a new folder called context. And we basically, in this application, it's a small app, so we don't have many resources. We basically we're going to have a context for anything to do with GitHub, which is the users, the repos, all that stuff. And then we're also going to have an alert context for our alerts, which is going to be very small in terms of, state and stuff like that. But if you have a big application, you might have a profile context, you might have a blog post context. Different resources should be broken up into different contexts. So we're going to start off by creating inside context another folder, and we're going to call this GitHub. And inside here, we're going to have three main files. We're going to have one called GitHub context.js. We're going to have another one called GitHub with an uppercase G, GitHub state.js, which is where basically all of our actions are going to go. So when we call an action to fetch data or anything like that, that's going to go in here. And then we also need a reducer, which is a function that basically decides what's going to happen to your state based on an action. So we're going to create another file here called GitHub reducer.js. So the way that I'm doing things is each resource has these three files. Okay, now the context file is actually very simple. All we're doing is initializing a new context. So we'll start there and we'll say import, and we want to import create context, and we're going to bring that in from React. And then we're going to initialize our GitHub context with create context. And then finally, we're just going to export default GitHub context. Okay, and that's it. That's all we need for this file. Now, the next thing we're going to do is start to look at our GitHub state. All right, so this in here is going to be our initial state. Also is going to be basically our actions. Like when we search users and we make a request to GitHub, that's going to go in here as opposed to right in our app.js. Our initial state's going to go in here as opposed to our app. So we're really going to clean up that app.js file. Now, we're going to be using something called types. And if you're familiar with Redux, a lot of this stuff is going to make sense to you. If you're not, it is a little intimidating. It's a little overwhelming. Just try to bear with me, and if you continue on through the rest of this project and the next one, I think you're going to get a really good idea how this stuff works. And even the last one where we use Redux, you'll see the similarities here. So with types, let's create a file. This is going to go in the context folder, but not in GitHub, because the types are relevant to all contexts that we create. So I'm going to create a file here called types.js. And types are really nothing more than just variables of strings that you can use, that you can call to change your state within your reducer. So for instance, let's create one. We're going to export a variable called search users, and we're just going to set it to a string of the same thing, search users. All right, we might as well create all of our types right now just so we don't have to come back to this file. So basically all of our actions have types: search users, get user, clear, get repos, set loading, set alert, and remove alert. Those are our types for this application. And obviously the bigger your app, the more functionality, the more actions, the more types you're going to have. So we can close that up, and let's go into our GitHub state and let's import React, and we're going to be using the use reducer hook here. Okay, and that comes in from React. And we're going to be making requests from here, so we want to import Axios. We're not going to have to make requests right from our app component anymore. We want to bring in our context, our GitHub context. And that's going to be from, it's in the same folder, so GitHub context. And then we want to import our GitHub reducer. From /GitHub reducer. Okay, and then the types that we're going to use. So we have search, actually let's do this. Let's say from /types, and then it should read them. So we'll say search users. We need set loading, clear users, get user, and get repos. So those are the types that we're gonna bring in. Now we want to create our initial state. So let's say const GitHub state equals, let's say props. Okay, so this is a function, and in here we're going to say const initial state, and this is basically our global state for anything that has to do with GitHub. So we have our users, which is going to be an empty array. We have the single user for the user page, which is an object. We have repos, which is going to be an array, and loading, which is going to be set to false. So basically the same type of thing we did in the app.js. And we're getting this error here because I forgot my arrow. All right, so this GitHub state is going to include all of our actions. Now, in order to basically dispatch to our reducer, because what happens is we call an action, it'll, for instance, make a request to GitHub, get a response, and then we dispatch a type back to our reducer. So we need to actually use the use reducer hook here. So we're going to say const, and this takes state and dispatch. Okay, and we want to set that to, or pull that from use reducer, and then just pass in the reducer, or I'm sorry, the reducer we're using, which is GitHub, and then our initial state. And a lot of this is boilerplate. Once you get this set up, then we're good to go, and we can start to create all of the actions and stuff that we want. All right, so for instance, we're gonna do like search user here. I'm just gonna put some comments of what we'll be doing. So we're gonna get user. Okay, we're also going to get repos. Oops. What else? We're gonna clear users, set loading, and then that should be it as far as actions. Now, what we want to return here is the provider. Okay, so we're going to say return, and we want to do GitHub context dot provider, because we basically have to wrap our entire application with the provider. Now this provider is going to, let's just do that. This provider is going to take in a bunch of props, which is going to, well, it's going to take in one prop of value, which we want to set here like this, and we want to pass in anything that we want available to the entire app, such as users, and we can get that from state.users. Okay, user, the single user, we can get from state.user. repos, get from state dot repos, loading, state dot loading. So the point here is we're making this available to our entire app. All right, now any methods or action methods we create here, like search users and so on, we're also going to want to pass those in. I haven't created those yet, so I'm not going to pass them in just yet. Now in the middle here, we just simply need to put in props.children because we're going to wrap our entire application in this provider. So down here, let's just export default GitHub state. All right. So we have this state file. Now let's go to our app.js, and inside our app.js we're going to bring in our GitHub state. So I'm going to bring this in, let's see, right above the CSS here. Actually, I'll just go right here and say import GitHub state from, we want to go inside context, inside GitHub, and we want GitHub state. Okay, and then we just need to simply wrap down here, and this stuff is all going to go into the state file, but down here above the router we're going to wrap this in GitHub state. Okay, so this is the GitHub state provider. Just make sure you wrap the whole thing like that. All right, so it just gives us a bunch of stuff that says this stuff is defined but never used, but we know that the GitHub state file is now being implemented. All right, and we shouldn't have any errors or anything. We just have, you know, the stuff here because we haven't used, but we still have all of our other methods in place in the app.js, and that's what's being called. So throughout the next few videos, what we want to do is move everything, all this stuff, including the state here, we want to move to our app level state, which is this file here. And then any changes that are made to the state are going to go through the reducer, which we haven't added anything to yet. All right, so that's it for this video. We got quite a bit done setting this stuff up. So in the next one, we'll start to deal with actions and sending state down and stuff like that. All right, so I'll see you in the next video.